Boom, boom. There's huge me. Okay. And Shannon, we got you. Okay, there we are. There we are. That just takes a second. Oh, why it did that, but anyway, I had to fix it. All right, there we are. We should have it now. Sorry, Shannon.
Is she in now?
She should be in now.
Hi,
Let's see.
Shannon.
No, maybe not. Yep, she's in. Okay, good deal. All right. Say participant. Okay, yes, I know. Go away. Go away. There it goes. Gosh, there's so many hoops to jump through to make it a happy thing. Okay. Yeah. Whatever. All right, so moving on from there, hopefully, if we can get technology to do its thing. All right. So we have gone over this and we went over that other video prior to lab. So hopefully those two ideas, keep those in your mind as we go through this whole lesson today. So unlocking Darwin's mysterious ideas. So he did have some pretty odd ideas and for his time, but certainly revolutionary and very well accepted today. We know it makes sense now. So we're talking about a dude that was born in 1809. That's way back. I mean, think about it. The United States is like just barely born. All right, but we're not talking ancient. This isn't like Democritus.
Within like 15 years of Charlotte Bronte.
Yeah, all kinds of interesting stuff was happening around this turn of the century time. All right, so he would be 212 this year. And he developed the biological theory that goes with evolution, which is what we call natural selection. And it explained how modern organisms evolved over long periods of time through common descent.
Someone should have taught his parents about natural selection, but he doesn't look like Dumpster Santa Claus.
Dumpster Santa. Oh, I love Darwin. I think he looks like Grandpa. He's got these kind eyes. No, you don't think so?
I don't know about kind.
I think he has kind eyes. So in 1831, so he's still relatively young. 1809, he's born. 1831, he starts traveling. So he spent 5 years on the HMS Beagle, which is one of those old wooden sailing ships, right? And he went all over the place. He did Australia. He went up here, where he started out up here, and he ended up spending a lot of time in this area right here, which is where the Galapagos Islands are located.
To where one of the windows. Wait, no, Galapagos Islands are on the other side.
I mean, right here. Sorry, I'm swirling around here, but yes,
You went to where one of the Windows 10 lock screens are in New Zealand.
One of the what is here?
Windows 10 lock screens.
Oh, Windows 10 lock screens. Oh, really? Is that one of the pretty pictures? Is New Zealand? Okay. Yeah. So he comes down. He goes around. Ends up over here, Galapagos. Right. Spends a lot of time. 5 years is a long time to be moving around on a boat for fun. So he noticed that species vary a lot globally. All right. So if you look at Australian species and comparing to North American or European species, you're going to see a lot of differences, right? And so he noticed that they're similar animals, but that inhabited separate but similar habitats, but the animals were still different, similar but different in similar habitats. So if you think about that, like you can think about the types of animals that inhabit arid places. Deserts. You're going to see the same types of animals in an African desert that you might see in the North American desert in the middle of the country, but they're still going to be different enough, right? So some of the similar environments have very different animals, like, here we go, kangaroos. Kangaroos kind of freak me out. I like them, but they kind of scare me.
They look pretty stupid in that picture.
It's the musk. If you look at any of the videos of them where they're like up close and they're flexing on people or they're banging on glass, they're scary.
The rest of like one before.
And then there's the video of the guy that punches that one because it attacks his dog. That's hilarious. So he noticed that species will vary locally. So you got different yet related animals that occupy different habitats within a local area. So for example, your tortoises and birds on the Galapagos varied from island to island. So you've got tortoises and the islands are not all that far apart, but the tortoises were clearly different from one to another. and birds are clearly different from one to another. So the area is fairly local, but your species are somewhat different. So here are your tortoises, for example, on the particular islands. And you can see like this one with the neck. This is what the video was talking about with the neck and the saddle shape. See this little dome here?
It was obviously found by the Spanish.
What, Galapagos?
Yeah.
Think so, yeah.
Or the Portuguese, just from the name.
Yeah, probably. So he found that species are varying over time. Well, how did he find this? Fossils, okay? He found fossils in all of his researching of extinct animals that were similar to living species. This doesn't live anymore, but it sure looks a lot like something I've seen before. So a good example of that is this glyptodont. Have you ever seen these? So they live in the same area that armadillos lived in, which is kind of, you know, around here. We got armadillos, don't we? But they're massive. This is an armadillo. And here's your glyptodont. I mean, that glyptodont thing is freaking
awkward of armadillos.
3 meters long. 3 meters is huge, right? Think about how big that is. And then, you know, here's a giant sloth and like your little modern cute 3-toed sloth that everybody loves. Oh, they're so cute. And then this thing's massive, right?
That's big.
Yeah. So, you know, he noticed they're similar, but something's changed. So he started to kind of put all these ideas together. So he thought about the patterns he'd seen on his voyage. He realized there were many similarities between animals he'd seen. He also noticed it with plants too. And that there was evidence that suggested that species were not fixed and they were somehow changed by some natural process. Okay, so how did he come to this conclusion? Well, he put a lot of stuff together. He used some ideas that had already come before him. And these were all things that he's milling around in his mind as he's doing all his big thinking. So Earth is very ancient and is continuously changing. How do we know that? Well, before him were these dudes. This guy is Hutton and this guy's Lyell. Lyell looks like Ebenezer Scrooge to me. I don't know why, but he really does. I mean, there's something very Scrooge-ish about Scrooge-ish.
I think it might be
That was dude. Could be.
He has a side hustle.
Yeah, those are like mutton chops. You know, those are serious. So anyway, Hutton and Lyell helped scientists in general see that Earth is millions of years old. And this is because, and that geologic processes happen very slowly and that they're still happening today. Yeah.
Lyell's the bottom guy?
This is Lyell. Yes.
Oh,
Hutton.
oh,
Lyell.
she's not Hutton with the muttons.
No, that would be great. That would be great, Cole, if it was Hutton with the mutton, but it's not.
Yeah, it's between his.
So Hutton proposed that rocks form very slowly and are changed by forces that twist, lift, and fold them. We know this now, right? Hutton was one of the first to come out and just say it. Okay, this is a slow process. This doesn't happen quickly. He also realized that mountains could be worn down by rain, wind, heat, cold, erosion. Okay, if you are here with us next year for Earth Science, we'll talk about this kind of stuff a lot. So he's actually coming out and saying it to the scientific community as a statement, right? And then in order for these events to occur, Earth must be more than a few thousand years old, which was the prevailing belief at the time. He's like, this stuff takes way too long to have happened in a few thousand years. Examples, beautiful canyons like this isn't going to happen in a few thousand years. And so he was one of the first people to come out and say that. So Lyell, he said that the geological processes that we see now must be the same ones that we saw millions of years ago. This seems really obvious, right? But if you haven't heard it before, nobody's come right out and said it, you would be making an assumption. Alex, are you with us, man? All right, sit up. Got one more before you got a break next week. The least y'all can do is hang with me today.
That's like cool running.
All right.
Noise, like
Sit on the floor if you feel sleepy, for real. So, I mean, I put hours and hours into class, so y'all can stay awake, I think. So, if you haven't really put consideration into it, maybe it doesn't occur to you that the same processes that we see today have always occurred or have occurred for a very long time. So he comes out and says it. And he also says there needs to be enough time in Earth's history for these changes, like a river making a canyon to take place, and a couple thousand years isn't going to cut it. So he agreed with Hutton that the Earth was way older. So two of them together, this is just, it's a woodcut from Lyell's Principles of Geology. There you go. That shows some features in Italy. So you can tell this dude's been out, he's been taking notes. He's done his work. So while in South America, Darwin actually got to see an earthquake. And this earthquake was strong enough that it lifted the rocky shoreline 3 meters out of the sea with the mussels and stuff still clinging to it. So when you see something like that, you actually see it, that drives home the point that there are forces that are changing Earth, that Earth is not a static system, right? It's always changing. The surface of Earth is constantly changing. And then later he observed that there were fossils of marine animals in mountains. So he saw them come up a little bit with an earthquake, and then later he sees them on the top of mountains. So he's like, okay, this must have been water at some point, right? So I think these guys, Lyell and Hutton, were onto something. If, one event can make them come up 3 meters, then a lot of time passes and they get all the way to the top of a mountain. Something must be moving them. There must be forces at work. So earthquakes were an example for him, that they could build mountains a few feet at a time. And we know that there's lots of things that build mountains, not just earthquakes, but fault lines and continental drift and all that kind of stuff. So he then got to thinking, if Earth changes over time, can life change too? So prior to this, the thought process had been, what's here has always been here as it is. That species didn't change over time. Living things were just sort of always the same, ever present, haven't changed. And that if it's a fossil, it's a dead thing, and it was its own thing and it died. But there was no reason at that point to consider that maybe that thing had changed into something else over time. The change had occurred and now it presents itself differently. So here's Lamarck. I love Lamarck. Poor Lamarck. So this is Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, all right? And he proposed that the use or disuse of organs caused organisms to gain or lose traits over time. This is Mr. Giraffe Man. Yes.
He looks a bit like a knockoff George Washington.
Kind of does.
Really
Yeah.
does.
Mhm.
Story of George Washington.
George Washington.
I think the little goofy cinnamon roll curls or whatever were super popular. I don't know. Most of them wore wigs because they had syphilis. Anyway, for real. Yes. Yeah, I'm sorry. You can go out now. Thanks. Can the dog go out now without eating Sprites? Yes.
Well,
So anyway.
there'll be sprites.
Yeah, there'll still be Sprites. So anyway, white wigs and syphilis aside, Lamarck here he's the Giraffe Man, all right? He thought that these characteristics could get passed to your next generation. So for example, water birds have long legs. Why? Well, because they had to keep wading in deeper and deeper water. So they grew their legs longer and longer and passed it on to their young, which we know is total nonsense. Like now we know this is complete and total nonsense, but his stuff wasn't useless, despite the fact that I'll show you in a minute, people are always teasing him still to this day. So here's his concept. You have this little weird stubby nosed giraffe, strange looking critter, and he keeps stretching to get to these big tall leaves, and then he gets a nice long neck and he passes it on. So if we evaluate this, although he was correct in a lot of ways, we know that acquired traits during a lifetime can't be passed to offspring, but we also got some ideas from him that we wouldn't have had otherwise, despite the teasing. So here's one example. Poor Lamarck getting memed. I mean, still being teased, right? I like this one. Let me tell you, these giraffes, beautiful, beautiful giraffes. They had short necks to be exact, but they kept jumping to eat those crooked leaves. All those jumping up and down made their necks longer. Trust me, no one understands evolution better than me. And then this one is also a really good one. Giraffes are the most heartless creatures because see the dead ones on the ground. They're not helping the little short-necked guy, so he's starving to death. Giraffes are the most heartless creatures. And then lastly, lastly, this one here. Whoa, this entire scientific community, this is worthless. So, but it's not worthless. And here's why. He was the first one to suggest that species aren't fixed. So like I said before, everybody thought that, you see a squirrel, that's been the squirrel forever. He's just arrived here on Earth like that and never changed. So he was the first to say that maybe things change. He also explained that evolution uses natural processes, and that natural process would be things like trying to reach your food. Now they were starting to see evolution occur. You could see it in small stuff. Hey guys, can you keep the volume down? Yo, they're loud. All right. So he was the first to suggest that there is change and that it's driven by natural processes. And then he was the first to recognize that there's a link between environment and body structure, which is huge. It's huge. He's the first one to look at that and go, why do these animals that live in the desert, why do a lot of them have scales, or why do the cacti have have thorns, this sort of thing. So this is really important stuff. So his stuff, even though it's kind of goofy and people make jokes about it today, it did pave the way for people like Darwin to start really thinking. So now Darwin has been thinking about, Earth's old. It takes millions of years, not a couple thousand years, for change to occur to Earth. So maybe life can change, and maybe it's also changing slow. And then he's also thinking about, all right, well, maybe species change over time, and maybe it has something to do with their environment. So then we get to this guy, Malthus. Okay, Malthus had major concerns about population growth, major concerns. So 1798, he noticed that people were being born faster than they were dying. Yeah.
Did he do the math?
Did you do the math? Yeah, Malthus. So then he reasoned that if the human population grew unchecked, there would not be enough living space and food for everyone. Panic time now.
Yeah.
You need to panic. All right.
He didn't
Now-
do enough math, because the exponential growth is not that much.
Now, realize the date here. We are pre-industrial revolution here. Industrial revolution came along and proved him horribly wrong, but a little panicked, right? And that the forces that work against human population are obvious, war, famine, disease. All right, but people have joked that Malthus made people crazy, and here's what we mean by that. So this guy, how Malthus drove the Discovery Channel gunman crazy. So this dude, I'll read this one to you because this is just interesting. So among the demands of James Lee, the deranged gunman who rampaged through the headquarters of the Discovery Channel, and this is in 2008, by the way, in Washington, D.C., before being shot and killed late Wednesday afternoon, was a request that the TV network develop shows that mention Malthusian sciences about how food production leads to overpopulation of the human race. Dude was clearly concerned. Insane, but perhaps not quite as kooky as it might initially seem, because when choosing crazy making prophets of doom and destruction as your inspiration, you could do a lot worse than 18th century economist Reverend Thomas Robert Malthus. The original dismissal scientist's main contribution to economics, the theory that growth of population would always outrun growth of production, thus dooming humanity to crushing poverty, was proven wrong by the Industrial Revolution almost immediately after he set his thoughts down on paper. Few theorists whose names have endured for centuries have been more spectacularly off the mark. In almost every measurable way, the world is immensely richer than it was at the time of Malthus, even in the face of surge of global population, that the economist would never have dreamed remotely feasible. For at least the last century, Malthus's ideas have been routinely dismissed in introductory economics textbooks and scoffed at by mainstream economists, whether liberal or conservative, Keynesian or Chicago school. So this poor dude gets a bad rep these days, and obviously had some panic stuff, and made this poor dude panic. And so anyway, interesting sidebar for the day. That was crazy. So how could some idea as crazy as this help Darwin? Well, Malthus was really talking about competition and supply and demand. So he reasoned that what Malthus proposed for human beings applied to all living things. And he observed that most organisms produce more offspring than they survive. So that's overproduction. Look at your sea turtles, for example. They lay huge clutches of eggs. Most of those babies do not survive to become adult sea turtles. A lot of them don't survive the initial hatching process. And then some of them, yes, don't make it to the ocean, and some that do get eaten pretty soon or die. So he noticed that this is a thing, that living organisms tend to produce more offspring than can survive. And he wondered which individuals get to survive and why. And if all the offspring that survived, all the offspring that were produced did survive, they would overrun the world. Think about how many sea turtles we would have if all the world's sea turtles survived every time the eggs hatched. That would be crazy. So when you get all these ideas together, this brings in thoughts of competition, right? And supply and demand, resources being limited. So artificial selection. So this is what we talked about last week when we talked about things like selective breeding. That's what artificial selection is. So to find an explanation for change in nature, Darwin studied changes produced by plant and animal breeders, people that are doing it on purpose. So some plants bear larger or smaller fruits than others. Some cows give more or less milk than others. And this told Darwin that variation could be passed from parent to offspring and used to improve crops and livestock, which humans have been doing for centuries, right? As soon as we went to an agrarian culture instead of a hunter-gatherer culture, we started selecting which crops we wanted to grow, which animals we wanted to domesticate. So in artificial selection, which is our selective breeding process, nature provides the variations, but humans are the ones that select what's useful. So nature provides the random genetic variations, and then we decide which ones we want to keep and further breed and which ones we want to just let go by the wayside, right? So if you were a rose breeder and suddenly you had this randomly mutated rose that was this gorgeous big flower and it lasted for 5 weeks and it smelled beautiful and whatever, you would want to breed that one. The mutation was random. Nature provided that. But you as the breeder want to select for it because you like it and you want it to make it to future generations. So Darwin knew that variation occurs in wild species as well as domesticated species, and he realized that natural variation provides the raw material for evolution. So now he's thinking all these things together, right? He's got this idea that Earth is old, that animals and plants and other species can develop slowly, maybe change over time, and that there's something going on that's selecting for what gets to survive and what doesn't, because it can be selected for if you do it intentionally. So there's some process that's causing it to happen in nature. So if it's not humans, it's nature. So artificial selection. Darwin himself bred pigeons. All right, he really liked fancy pigeons. These are some of Darwin's pigeons. This is the weirdest looking thing ever, but it's not a joke because for real, I have a picture of an actual one, not just a painting. Like, it was a thing. So when he wasn't busy doing science, he was busy breeding pigeons. He loved his pigeons quite dearly. I like the comment there, quite dearly. There he is with his pigeons. Ooh, look at the pigeons. I love this one too. Pigeons, they're damn interesting. You know? And then lastly, for real, he bred these pigeons. I'm sorry, this like nightmare pigeon, right? I mean, but he did that. He selected for that, which means over time, certain things that are selected for are what get produced in the population. So what's doing the selecting if it's not humans? So he presents his case and he gathered all his information and he wanted to put it out to the public. But in 1858, this dude, Alfred Wallace, had an essay, put out an essay that were his thoughts on how evolution occurs were almost identical to Darwin. So Darwin, doing like every scientist in history has done, wants to get his idea out first because he who puts it out is the one that gets the credit. Think back to Watson and Crick and Franklin. Franklin was taking her time doing all the calculations, right? She wanted to put it out with all the calculations. And Watson and Crick were like, shoot, get it out fast. Who got the credit? So Darwin, what's he do? He doesn't want to get scooped. So he presents his work at a scientific meeting, which is a little more public than just sending out an essay. And he included some of Wallace's essay at the end. Oh, this guy agrees with me. So yeah, so he gets the credit. So the next year he published Origin of the Species. You can buy On the Origin of the Species at Amazon, Barnes & Noble. It is still in publication. It is still out there. It is his complete works. It's got, if it's a good copy, it has sketches and whatnot of what he saw. And it combines all these ideas together. This takes way longer than a couple thousand years. And it, uses the evidence from one island to another island, what he saw, from the animals in Australia to the animals in Europe, compared all these things together and put it all together in this nice, neat little book that you can still get today. So he talks about this concept called the struggle for existence. So this is where Malthus comes back in. So what was Malthus saying? That what was going to happen to the human population? Yeah, that we were reproducing faster than we were dying. So, oh my gosh, we're going to overpopulate. We're going to run out of resources. All right, so think about that. If there's limited resources, what are the organisms going to do to get those resources?
Right.
Yeah, fight is one way to put it, but yeah, compete. They're going to compete. So here's where Malthus, even though he had wacky ideas and stuff, still come into play. So from his theory, you get the concept of supply and demand, right? Now you have a limited supply and a high demand for certain resources. And Darwin reasoned that if more individuals are produced than can survive, then they will have to compete for food, living space, other necessities of life. So he called this the struggle for existence. That's how he termed it. So That's part one. Then you have variation and adaptation. So he says that individuals have natural variations among their inheritable traits. That's obvious if you look around this room. We all have variations. They're natural variations, and they are all inherited by you and can be passed on from you. So then he said some of these variations are going to be better suited to life in their environment than others. So to pick on myself, so my genetic background is like English, Scottish, and then a lot of like Scandinavian, Swedish stuff too. So think about sunlight, okay, and hours of light within a day. Most people that are from Nordic and Scandinavian countries have what color eyes? Blue. Yeah, and mine are super light blue. And that's because my ancestors way back when were advantaged to have lighter blue eyes that actually pick up more light in the dark. But if I'm outside in the blazing sun, I have got sunglasses on. I cannot be out there in the blazing sun. But if my ancestors had been along the equator where there's a lot of sun all the time, days are long, what color eyes do most of those people have through South America, Africa, Asia? Brown eyes, right? Okay. And that's an adaptation that is advantageous to them. So it's better suited for certain environments. So faster predators can catch prey more efficiently, and prey that are faster or better camouflage are protected and avoid being caught, which is exactly what we saw today in our lab, right? The better camouflage you are, the better you are at keeping yourself from being caught. So he got to thinking that any inheritable characteristic that increases an organism's ability to survive and reproduce in an environment is what he's going to term as an adaptation.
You have heritable, not inheritable.
I think they're interchangeable, but I could be wrong.
Just,
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah.
I'm not sure.
I'll look it up. You may have. So these are adaptations. So an adaptation is essentially a mutation or a change or a difference, right? That is going to advantage that organism. So if you think about adaptations advantage the organism, then you'll remember that that's what they are. So examples would be things like tiger's claws, camouflage colors, plant structures, avoidance behaviors, all kinds of things. So like this little owl, you got camouflage going on, right? What's an adaptation that camels have? Hump. Yeah, but where?
Oh, the eyelashes.
Eyelashes are good. What are the eyelashes for? Yeah,
The
cows have them
water
too.
storage
Keep
in
the
their
flies out of their eyes and the sands and whatever. Okay, but how about water? How do camels do with water?
They store it in their home.
Sort of. Yeah, but they can go a long time without water as compared to other organisms. So if you need an animal to transport you or haul your stuff in a desert, this is going to be your best bet. You good there, Piper? Man, everybody's needing a break here. So, and what are obviously we talked about the adaptation here. This is longer neck. Let's look at this one. What's the adaptation for the cacti?
Pokey.
Yeah. Okay, so why does the cactus have spines and spikes and thorns?
Because it hurts.
Yeah, why is it a target? Because it's got water and they live in the desert. All right, how about the polar bear? Do you know what that adaptation is? Yeah, the fur. Okay, so what color is the hair on a polar bear?
Clear.
It is clear. What color is the skin? Black. Why? Because it acts like a little fiber optic, like a little string of glass. It looks white because there's so many of them packed together that you get kind of that refraction of the light, reflection of the light, and it ends up looking white to you, but it's actually clear like glass. So that light goes right down through it, hits their dark skin, which then makes them much warmer, right? Absolutely. So what's the adaptation here?
Fancy.
Yeah, why? Yes. Now remember, I said it before and I'll say it again, but in the majority of species that reproduce sexually, females are choosy. You ever seen a peahen? Yeah, you ever seen one? A peahen looks like nothing special. They're brown, drab, boring. Why does he look like this? Well, he's trying to get himself a date, right? He wants a mate, And that's his whole purpose for looking that way. And organisms will go so far as, like a peacock is a great example, to make themselves vulnerable in order to reproduce, because it doesn't matter if you survive if you don't reproduce and pass that genetic information on to the next generation. That's the big point. You have to pass those genes on for those adaptations to become part of the population and eventually develop a new species in some cases. So a good example is, I'll see if I can find it, but a biology professor of mine wrote this really great article. It was somewhat metaphorical, but there was a good scientific basis for it. And it was about a particular species of South American frog, okay, or toad. I think it's a frog. But in order to attract a mate, the male frogs go, wee, wee. And that's what they say is wee. And the girls think that's pretty attractive. And then, hey, man, I'll check you out. But over time, it's become apparent that the males that go, wee, chuck, 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 and do this kind of deep guttural chuck, chuck, chuck sound are way more attractive because that's hot. Chuck, chuck, chuck is hot. So all the female frogs are far more attracted to the chuck, chuck, chucking males. Oh, I'm back. Isaiah, I just zapped him. I don't know what he's barking at. Hi.
Somebody's lying down.
So anyway, sorry. So if you're chuck, chuck, chucking, you have a far better chance of attracting a mate. But if you're chuck, chuck, chucking, the predator birds that eat you can pick up the chuck, chuck, chuck. They sort of pick up the wee, but not so much. The chuck, chuck, chuck is like music to their ears. They're all dinner, but they will chuck, chuck, chuck. They will risk the chuck, chuck, chucking because it attracts the females. So the urge to pass their DNA on is so strong that they'll put themselves at risk. Yeah.
The birds pick it up a wee bit.
A wee bit more. Yeah. So survival of the fittest. So here's a good word for you. Fit. When we talk about fittest here in the United States, what does that mean? You say somebody's fit.
Athleticism.
Athletic. Yeah. Is that what you think of when you think of fit? All right. Do you know in the UK when they say fit, what are they talking about? That's like a way of saying he's hot or she's hot or he's attractive. Oh, so he's mad fit. That's what this is. All right. When Darwin's talking about fit, he's talking about suited for the environment. So it's not the same fit. It's not the biggest or the strongest or the most attractive. It's whatever is best suited to the environment. So he felt that there must be a connection between environment and how an organism survives. He said that the ability to survive and reproduce in a specific environment is called fitness. That's how he's using the term. So fitness depends on how well an organism is suited for the environment, not how strong it is. So fitness is a result of an adaptation. So all adaptations, remember, are random. Nature is throwing the adaptations out there randomly based on, how DNA is coded for, whether there's a mutation, all that good stuff. And those become adaptations if they're advantageous. So good adaptations allow organisms to survive and get passed on to offspring, which is how they become more prevalent within a species. And good fitness means you get to reproduce. Low fitness means you got to have few offspring, and eventually people with that trait are going to become extinct. Organisms with that trait will become extinct. So Darwin thought that this seemed very similar to artificial selection, and it really does. This is very similar to how we do selective breeding, right? So he referred to survival of the fittest as natural selection, because if it's not being human selected artificially, then it's being naturally selected by nature. So although the traits that occur are random, the selection process is not at all random. It's very organized. It's nature doing what nature does, and it's very, very organized. You good there, Sid? You good there, Alex? Come on, you can do it. So he referred to survival of the fittest as natural selection. Survival means more than just staying alive. It means reproducing, passing adaptations to the next generation. So natural selection means nature is choosing. So instead of us choosing, it's nature choosing. Artificial selection is man choosing. So favorable characteristics are inherited over several generations. So here's your example. Over here, we got gray mice and brown mice. Okay, we have 3 gray mice and 6 brown mice. So apparently brown is far more prevalent in the gene pool. That's the more prevalent allele. Everybody's inheriting the brown for the most part. Couple get the gray. Well, here comes a bird going to live in this environment where these mice live on this gray rock. And what's going to happen? The brown ones are easy to see. The bird's going to pick them off. The gray ones will survive. Their genes will get passed. And before you know it, most of the mice are now gray and not brown. This is exactly what we're saying about our sprites, right? In time, we're going to end up with almost all green because they're going to be better camouflaged. And the other ones are not advantaged, and nature's going to do what it does with them. So you can think of it like a breeder or a farmer taking what they don't want out of their gene pool and tossing it aside. Nature's going to do what it does, which is kind of the same thing.
Except it's also being fed to stuff.
Yes. So this one was just sort of entertaining. It's like a comic strip that somebody did, but I happened upon it and I saved it. So it says white bird, male peacock, yellow peacock, female, peacock colorful, mutated peacock, male peacock. Already there. So female peacock lacks interest in mating with the colorless peacock. I don't like you. And then it talks here about, wait, here, that's the one I loved. Male peacock dies of natural causes, ending passing of traits onto offspring. Blood only present for clarification on death.
That doesn't look good.
It was necessary to share this because blood only present for clarification
I
on death.
was really hoping they're
In
gonna
case you weren't sure or clear, that's a dead.
I was hoping they were gonna put quotes around natural causes.
Could have put an X
Natural
over it,
causes.
flipped it upside down, that's something, but oh man.
There are X's over the eyes?
No, there could have been. That would have been easy
Natural
too, but no, we just put blood on it.
I like the
So-
shiny
Female peacock mates with colorful peacock due to its enticing colors and continuing the mutation of colorful feathers. So anyway, that was
That's
just,
a very large
that blood's
mutation
only
from
there
the
to
white
clarify
bird.
that he died.
Those things natural causes.
So natural selection is the process by which organisms with variations most suited to their local environment survive and leave more offspring. So this can be, they're better suited to eat whatever food is there. They're better camouflaged. They attract mates better. Any way that you can possibly think of competing for a resource, whoever is better suited to compete for that resource is going to survive. And the resources are all sorts of things: shelter, water, food, mates, and then in general, just not getting eaten by anything, right?
That's a good way to look.
Right? So natural selection occurs in any situation in which more individuals are born than can survive. So if you've got a whole clutch of 50 eggs and only 10 typically survive, it's the 10 that are most suited to the environment that are going to survive. The other 40 in some way weren't as well suited, or maybe they were in the wrong place at the wrong time and the shark came
There
by and ate them or
might
whatever.
be
But
one very, very lucky.
maybe, yeah. So over time, natural selection results in change in inherited characteristics of a population. So these changes increase a species' fitness in its environment. So Darwin had 4 big postulates. You with me, Sid? Come on, girl, we're almost there. Somebody shake her. So tap her, so she's up. There, she's up, she's good. So individuals within a species vary. This is postulate 1. Okay, this is basically statement number 1. Individuals within a species vary. Now, it's obvious in a species like us or dogs, for example, where we've done a lot of selective breeding. It may be less obvious in trees that all look the same or bugs that all look the same. But when you get looking really close, even if you can't see the differences, there are definitely differences. Maybe they're internal or whatever, but they're definitely there. He also said that some of these variations are passed on to offspring. Okay, that makes sense. Now, not every variation is going to get passed on to offspring because maybe, you know, the allele for the variation is recessive. Maybe it's dominant. That's going to depend too. When you get a mutated gene, whether or not that gene is going to be dominant or recessive when compared to the other alleles within the gene pool for that particular trait is going to impact whether or not you see that particular phenotype for that new trait from the mutation more or less often. So individuals vary in their ability to survive and reproduce. Okay, yeah, I'd say that's true for sure. Yeah, probably even for humans, obviously for humans. So individuals with the most favorable adaptations are more likely to survive and reproduce. All right, so he's put it all together now. He's thrown it out to the world. And yeah, it makes sense when you put it all together. He's given you the mechanism now to describe what we see as evidence for evolution. So you can watch evolution on a micro scale, like example, the moths, right? That is clearly evolution within a species, and it can be visualized right there in front of you on a micro scale. You can see it happen. Now, macro scale stuff, when you're talking about fossils and things that, you know, have been there for millions of years, and you can postulate that maybe this organism we see today evolved from this organism that is now extinct, but that is more of a macro scale thing. And that's something you can't directly prove. We're getting closer though, when we get into some technology that I'll talk about. So common descent. So this is what people have been thinking about for a while now, since ancient Greece even, that natural selection well, not natural selection, but that something is producing organisms that have come from something else. So Darwin says that natural selection produces organisms with different structures than their ancestors, different niches and new habitats. So as new habitats evolve, certain species are going to become more suited, will be more suited, and those will be the ones that prevail. So each living species has descended with changes over time. So example, modern horse, 60 million years ago, horse relative. And if you follow the fossil record, you can see how this horse evolved over time into what we know today. And you can look at certain things like compare their bone structure, which we're going to get to in a minute, to see how similar it actually is. So if we look back far enough, we could find common ancestors of all living things. A single tree of life links all living things, and it's known as the principle of common descent. So this right here is actually Darwin's sketch from his notebook. It looks just like this. This is a scan or photograph of the actual sketch. And he drew this little tree. This was his little tree that he drew. Now today it's a way more complicated phylogenetic tree, but this was the basic first ever phylogenetic tree, really. So we watched this before lab, so I'm gonna skip. So Darwin argued that living things have been evolving on Earth for millions of years. And today fields like genetics and molecular biology can support that idea. So now we can take, now that we have molecular biology and genetics, we can look at fossil data if we can pull any sort of material out of it that can be run through DNA processing, or we can pull certain molecular data from it. We can tell that certain things are linked genetically, and the more genetically similar, the closer they are within the phylogenetic tree of how one species branches off another. So evolution does not, I love this. This is not what evolution looks like. This is a great video
What
here.
was the double helix in the famous blue marble photo of the Earth taken from space above? The most recognizable scientific image in the world. A depiction of human evolution in just 6 easy steps. But of course, as professional wrestling and pretty much all of reality television has shown us, just because something is popular doesn't mean that it's an accurate depiction of reality. Let me walk you through it. You probably recognize the naked guy on the right. That's Homo sapiens, an anatomically modern human. The guy who seems to be stalking him is labeled Cro-Magnon, a rough-looking customer who I'll talk about more in a minute. Behind him is Neanderthal. On his heels are Ramapithecus, then Oreopithecus, which sounds delicious, and finally, a tiny monkey-like early ape known as Dryopithecus. The idea of this evolving from this may seem like it's right out of the 19th century, but these images actually first appeared in 1965 in a volume published by Time Life Books called Early Man. And in its defense, the book wasn't exactly trying to say that we evolved right from that hairy little homunculus. Instead, the book, written by anthropologist F. Clark Howell, offered a relatively nuanced discussion of human evolution for the time, and even warned against interpreting the illustration literally as a progression from one species directly to the next. The book sold well, and the illustration became extremely popular. And even though the picture originally included 15 different primates in a row and was called The Road to Homo sapiens, the abbreviated version of it became known as the March of Progress. And thus, one of science's most pernicious memes was born. So, what's wrong with this picture? Well, first of all, there are only males in this picture. Humans, like most animals, reproduce sexually, which means we come in two distinct flavors to make our existence possible. Each inhibit of our development with only one sex is like trying to eat sushi with only one chopstick. You're just not gonna get it all. Next, we're not even directly related to some of those guys. Like, as Howell himself pointed out, Oreopithecus was kind of a bit player in the human drama. It lived for a few million years in what's now Southern Europe, but disappeared rather quickly. And the latest research suggests that it probably wasn't even bipedal, as you see here. Then there's Cro-Magnon. While that was kind of a catch-all phrase for primitive humans 50 years ago, the specimen that the term was based on turned out to be a modern Homo sapien. So they're generally no longer considered to even be a thing. They also did not evolve from Neanderthals, as the picture suggests. Modern humans and Neanderthals actually coexisted until about 40,000 years ago. We were contemporaries with a shared common ancestor. But they turned out to be unable to adapt to all the changes in the world around them, including the arrival of us. And that's by far the most important problem with this image. Evolution isn't a linear process. It doesn't turn one species into another. It's really about genetics. Organisms are constantly developing new adaptations. And the ones with the adaptations that make the most fit for their environment end up reproducing more and spreading their genes all over the place. Scientists call that being evolutionarily successful. And there are plenty of other organisms with whom we share ancestors that are just as successful, like chimps and orangutans, because they continue to exist and evolve like we do. If you had to express it visually, the human story probably would look more like an incredibly complex tree, or maybe more of a fractal, with many stubs and branches, some of which extend to the present time while others taper out. But it definitely would not resemble some kind of primate police lineup. Thank you for watching this episode of SciShow, and a special thanks to our Summable subscribers without whom this show would not be possible. If you have any questions or comments or ideas,
I like him. He's entertaining. So phylogeny. So these are finches. Yeah. Finches, like Darwin loved his finches so much. So phylogeny is basically it's the process of how one organism evolves to a different species, which evolves to a different species. Now, there are, like he stated, organisms to which we are genetically related that evolved from a common ancestor, but are still successful because they're still here. Like you said, orangutans and chimps, for example. So it's just showing here that this was the proposed ancestral species for all of these different kinds of finches. And you can see these finches are all quite different. And they have different beak structure, different body structure, different color, because they're all specialized for their environment, which again just means that they had the adaptations that were advantageous, and those are the ones that continued to pass their genes on. So this is a pineapple phylogeny. Pineapple. So if you follow it down, you find that its closest relative here would be corn. And their common ancestor, well, its closest relative would be this common ancestor, but like a cousin, I guess, would be corn. And then you come down, you got monocots. When we get into plants, you got monocots, dicots, there's all kinds of good stuff. Basically, it just means there's like one part within their seed as opposed to two. Like a lima bean, you break open, it's got halves, that's a dicot. Corn doesn't do that, it's a monocot. So then what else is in here? Things like avocados. Then you get oranges, but yeah, bananas, eudicots, they're over here. And then juniper. So junipers would be the oldest in this particular diagram. Fireflies. Okay, wow. These flashes and glows. Oh boy, look at all the craziness for fireflies. That's a lot, right?
A lot of words.
A lot of stuff. So then you have the concept of biogeography. All right, we talked about biogeography way back in Unit 1. So Darwin recognized the importance of pattern in distribution of life. Biogeography, as you guys know, is a study of where organisms live and where their ancestors lived in the past. So two biogeographical patterns that were significant to Darwin were that species that are closely related but different. It's a pattern in which closely related species are different in slightly different climates. So related, but the climate's different, and therefore the species are a little different. So take, owls and snowy, like a barn owl and a snowy owl. They're related, they're both owls, but the snowy owl's white, right? And then to Darwin, the biogeography of the Galapagos species suggested that populations on the island evolved from a mainland species. And that over time, natural selection on the islands produced variations among populations that resulted in different but closely related island species. So he noticed that all the birds that he collected throughout the Galapagos were all types of finches, tree finches, warbler finches, ground finches, and the different types of beaks they had were specialized to what they were able to eat. what was there in their habitat. Fruit, insects, cacti, seeds, whatever is available to them. Those with the proper beak are more specialized. We'll say specialized for that purpose. Distantly related but similar. So this is the other pattern. He said this is a pattern in which very distantly related species develop similarities in similar environments. So he noted that similar ground-dwelling birds inhabit similar grasslands in Europe, Australia, and Africa. So these are distantly related, but they're similar because their environments are similar. So differences in body structures indicate that they evolved from different ancestors, but similarities provide evidence that similar selection pressure caused species to develop similar adaptations. So the environment and the habitat creates a certain amount of pressure that impacts how an organism evolves. Geographic distribution of living species. Okay, so muskrats, capybaras, coypus, beavers are similarly related. He noticed where they were distributed. I gotta speed up a little because I'm watching the clock. So age of Earth and fossils. The age of Earth. Darwin viewed the fossil record as core evidence of evolution, proposed that Earth was hundreds of millions of years old instead of a few thousand. All right. He also argued that countless species of many different forms had appeared on Earth that had lived for a long time and then vanished. So from viewing the remains found in rock layers, it was observed that species indeed changed over time. So if you look in rock layers, you'll see something like this, right? The younger stuff is typically on top. The older stuff is on the bottom. Now, there are forces within the Earth's crust that will shift what is where. Perhaps the older stuff gets pushed to the top. You'll see this happen when we do our science next year. Piper, Alex, you with me? And you can date, even in Darwin's time, you could date how old things were based on historical evidence of volcanoes exploding. There would be, written narratives of a volcano exploding in some classic piece of literature, and they'd have a rough date, right? So that's something they used. Piper, are you with me? Piper, hello, come on. Just a little bit longer. Age of Earth. So half a century after Darwin published his theory, science goes ahead and they find radioactivity. All right. So now they can use radioactivity to establish the age of rocks and fossils, carbon dating, things of this sort. So not that long, 50 years or so after he suggested it, they were able to prove it with some science there. So your radioactive dating indicates that Earth is about 4.5 billion years old, which supports his idea. Instead, he's saying it's not a couple thousand, it's got to be older than that. Lyell and Hutton as well, right? So then recent fossil finds. So during Darwin's time, not enough intermediate fossils had been found to document the evolution of modern species from their ancestors. So you're seeing very old and new, but not intermediate. So since Darwin, paleontologists have discovered hundreds of fossils that identify intermediate stages in the evolution of many different groups of modern species. So example, whales, birds, dinosaurs, to birds, fish. Where's that? No, there should be something there by whales, but I don't know where that went. Oh, that's weird. Okay, so dinosaurs to birds and fish to four-legged animals. So we've seen the intermediate species that show that change. So if you've never seen, and we'll talk about these more when we get in a little further into specific types of organisms, but things like lamprey. And even with fish, you can see, if you look at fish fossil record, you can see fish go from cartilaginous organisms to organisms that were predominantly cartilaginous, agnathans, but had in particular like a bony jaw and only a bony jaw. And then you get into osteichthyes, what we call bony fish, which are today's kind of modern fish. All right, so we've seen this image before, right? You've got the same fossils here that you had here and here that you had here. So this was evidence of continental drift and all, but it was also evidence that these species over time changed, because the species that are currently in this area or currently in that area have evolved from this guy here. Now, if this area moves and shifts to a place that has a totally different climate than this area, then you're going to get species that are going to have similar features due to the pressures of the habitat if they develop similarly. If they don't, the habitats don't develop similarly, then you'll see species that have a common ancestor but are much more different today. So this is some super interesting stuff. So when you get to comparing anatomy and embryology, it's further evidence for Darwin's claims. So in Darwin's time, scientists noted that all vertebrate limbs had the same basic bone structure, but some were used for crawling, some for climbing, some for running, and some for flying. So these are what we call homologous structures. I love this whole concept. Homologous and analogous structures are fascinating. So homologous structures, same structure, different function. So here's your frog leg on the inside, and here's your alligator leg, your chicken leg or bird leg, wing, a horse's leg, and then a lobe-finned fish, which is one of our more ancient fish. So these bones are all homologous. Remember what homologous means? It's like the pair of shoes, right? Shoes are not the same, but they go together. So basically these are the same type of bone in the same similar location, but look at how they have developed differently over time. So in this case, so these, your metatarsals here, which are in this part of your hand, they're the big long bones in your hand. In a bird, they're this part of the wing. So when you eat a flat, not a drumette, but a flat, that's this in you. That's the same part in you that is right here where your metatarsals are. But look at the horse, it's way down here, right? And then in the alligator, it's still sort of metatarsal. So all of that, all of these structures are of the same structure, basically. It's the same basic structure that's been modified based on how it's going to be used. So in this case, it's used for flying. In this case, it's paddling, right? In this case, it's running. So homologous structures, Darwin proposed that animals with similar structures evolved from a common ancestor with a basic version of that structure. Now, similar structures isn't totally accurate. It should say homologous structures, because here's an example, a similar structure. A bird, a hawk's wing and a penguin's wing. Similar structure. That's going to be homologous because inside they're the same, but they have a different purpose now. What about a butterfly's wing and a hawk's wing? Those are not homologous. They don't have, yes, those are going to be analogous because their purpose is the same, but their structure is different. So similarities and differences among homologous structures help determine how recently species shared a common ancestor. And homologous structures also have been found in plants. So the clue to common descent is common structure, not common function. So again, butterflies and birds, their common ancestor is nowhere near as recent as a penguin that paddles and a bird that flies with the same basic structure. So it's structure, not function, that we're looking for. So not inherited from a common ancestor would be function, things that are purely function. Analogous structures, so that's what we're talking about when we say function. So these are body parts that share the same function, but not the same structure. Same function, different structure. So example is a bee wing and the wing of a bird. So here we have analogous structures. Here's your bat wing, some kind of a bird. I'm not even sure what. No, this is a bat. This is a pterodactyl, I guess. I don't know what this one is. And then there's your moth or whatever. Okay, well, these are analogous. This moth is analogous to these creatures here. These are homologous, these three. And this guy is analogous to all three. Although they use this structure for the same function, it's not the same structure, right? So here's homologous versus analogous. This is a good one. It's short, but it's
Thanks for
pretty
stopping
good.
by. Today we're talking about the differences between homologous structures and analogous structures. So this is a topic you may come across in biology or evolution. Let's talk about homologous structures first. So homologous structures have a similar structure, meaning their anatomy or the bone structure is similar. They have a differing function, so a wing versus an arm versus a fin, for example. And they form from a common ancestor, so a common ancestor that gave them that structure. Analogous structures, on the other hand, have a different structure, so they do not have a similar anatomy, but they do share a function, a similar function, so wings, fins, things like that. And they do not form from a common ancestor. So let's look at some examples of homologous structures. So the arm of the monkey and the fin of a narwhal. Those would be homologous structures. They have a similar structure but have a different function. Again, the wing of a bat and the leg of a mouse would be homologous structures. Analogous structures examples, you can look at a bird, the wing of a bird versus the wing of an insect. Definitely a similar function, but not the same structure and not a common ancestor. Again, another example, the fin or wing of a penguin and the fin of a shark. They both use to swim with, similar function, but different structure. Remember homologous structures, think homo means same, and so they're from the same ancestor. And if you remember that, then you'll always know the analogous structure is the other one. That's it. If you have questions about vestigial structures,
Vestigial structures. All right. So vestigial structures are structures that are similar but reduced in size or unused. All right. So this would be, for example, like a human appendix. Okay. We don't use our appendix. It just causes us trouble. I know.
I don't have one.
I don't have one either. 2 years ago, that was the first day of school, first day of co-op. I ended up in surgery that night. Well, the next morning, but still. So humans have a vestigial structure. One would be appendix. A wisdom teeth is another one. Can you think of any others?
Tailbone.
Tailbone. Yeah.
Fingernails.
Maybe toes, maybe fingernails. We have a reason for those. We use them for stuff.
Toes are for balance.
Toes are for balancing.
Fingernails are for clawing people. Yes.
That's true. So vestigial pelvis and femur of a modern whale. So a modern whale has a pelvis and a femur, which is this bone. What for? It doesn't have legs,
They used to.
but it still has it. Yeah, it still has that. So we also have, we talked about appendix and wisdom teeth, goosebumps. Goosebumps are a vestigial, well, the muscles that cause goosebumps are vestigial structure. So it's an anatomical feature or behavior that no longer seems to have a purpose in current form of an organism. So useful trait in a primate relative would be your tailbone, your tail. Humans, we don't use it. Don't even know it's there unless we sit down too hard and break it. That's not fun, right? So why do humans have a third? Oh, this is a good one.
You know that little pink thing nestled in the corner of your eye? It's actually the remnant of a third eyelid. Known as the plica semilunaris, it's much more prominent in birds and a few mammals, and functions like a windshield wiper to keep dust and debris out of their eyes. But in humans, it doesn't work. It's vestigial, meaning it no longer serves its original purpose. There are several other vestigial structures, like the plica semilunaris, in the human body. Most of these became vestigial long before Homo sapiens existed, quietly riding along from one of our ancestor species to the next. But why have they stuck around for so long? To answer this question, it helps to understand natural selection. Natural selection simply means that traits which help an organism survive and reproduce in a given environment are more likely to make it to the next generation. As the environment changes, traits that were once useful can become harmful. Those traits are often selected against, meaning they gradually disappear from the population. But if a trait isn't actively harmful, it might not get selected against and stick around even though it isn't useful. Take the tailbone. Evolutionary biologists think that as the climate got drier and grasslands popped up, our tail-bearing ancestors left the trees and started walking on land. The tails that had helped them in the trees began to disrupt their ability to walk on land. So, individuals with mutations that reduced the length of their tails became more successful at life on land, surviving long enough to pass their short tails on to the next generation. The change was likely gradual, over millions of years, until about 20 million years ago, our ancestors' external tails disappeared altogether. Today, we know human embryos have tails that dissolve as the embryo develops, but the stubby tailbone sticks around, probably because it doesn't cause any harm. In fact, it serves a more minor function as the anchor point for certain other muscles. Up to 85% of people have a vestigial muscle called the palmaris longus. To see if you do, put your hand down on a flat surface and touch your pinky to your thumb. If you see a little band pop up in the middle of your wrist, that's the tendon that attaches to this now defunct muscle. In this case, the fact that not everyone has it has helped us trace its function. Vestigial traits can persist when there's no incentive to lose them, but since there's also no incentive to keep them, random mutations will sometimes still eliminate them from part of the population. Looking at our primate relatives, we can see that the Palmaris longus is sometimes absent in those that spend more time on the land, but always present in those that spend more time in trees. So we think it used to help us swing from branch to branch and became unnecessary when we moved down to land. The appendix, meanwhile, may once have been part of the intestinal system our ancestors used for digesting plant materials. As their diets changed, those parts of the intestinal system began to shrink. Unlike other vestigial structures, though, the appendix isn't always harmless. It can become dangerously inflamed. For most of human history, a burst appendix could be a death sentence. So why did it stick around? It's possible that it was very slowly on its way out, or that mutations simply hadn't arisen to make it smaller. Or maybe it has other benefits. For example, it might still be a reservoir of bacteria that helps us break down food. But the fact is, we're not really sure why the appendix persists. Evolution is an imperfect process. Human beings are the result of millions of years of trial, error, and random chance. And we're full of evolutionary relics to remind us of that. No organs evolve faster and into more varied shapes than those evolved in procreation. Watch this video to.
So you can look up online tons of examples of vestigial structures. There's some that are less obvious, like this dude here. I don't have this thing. I mean, maybe I do a little bit. I guess I do a little bit. Yeah, maybe a little.
What'd you say?
Does that mean what?
When did there just be some kid born without an appendix? And then
I mean, that could be a thing. Sure. It's probably more likely that it will shrink up first and then it could become non-existent. Yeah.
We live in a world now where you can actually record data like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So imagine how interesting it would be if you're that kid and in like 20 million years in the future, people still know who you are.
Yeah. So it's interesting to look though, because you probably possess more vestigial structures and even behaviors than you're aware of. I'll see if I can find some videos to include in the email. There may be some fun things to watch or to try with family members over Thanksgiving. Check your family members and see who possesses this list of traits. So embryology. Embryology is a study of the early stages of development in an organism. So this is yet more data that helps support the concepts of evolution or change over time in a species. So researchers noticed a long time ago that vertebrate embryos look very similar. The same groups of embryonic cells develop in the same order and in similar patterns. So the same types of embryonic cells that turn into your skin will turn into the skin or body covering of other organisms, other vertebrates. So vertebrate embryos have a fold of tissue in the neck region called gill pouches. We all have this at one point in our lives. We all have these gill pouches. In fish, they develop into gills. And in humans, they develop into our inner ear bones. So your hammer, your anvil, your stirrup, these come from and develop from the same cells, the same tissues that evolved into, well, that develop into gills in fish. So for example, here are some early stages of a chicken, a turtle, and a rat.
Rat looks kind of rat-like.
Yeah, kind of.
Turtle looks like some sort of evil dinosaur.
So in this case, we have here, see these gill slits right here? And they're the same all the way across. Here, here, here. You can see similar structures, right? Gill slits right here for a person. This is a human on this side. And tail. Here's your tail, 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 tail. There's our tail. Every one of us has had a tail. Every one of us has had gill slits at some point in our life. Gill pouches or gill slits. So this embryo develops into a fish, this one to a salamander, this one into a tortoise, a chick, a rabbit, and a human.
That was adorable.
And you can see, like, for example, if you look at this fish here, it doesn't develop nearly the size of like a leg bud or hind limb bud as these organisms do. You can see where they kind of branch off. Like all these ones at the top look the most similar. And then it sort of goes this way, doesn't it? If you look at what's most similar to what's least similar, there's sort of a gradient of data that goes this direction. But you can see how we have limb buds here, and you can see why, in this case, the structure inside a chicken's arm is going to be very similar to the structure inside your hand, your arm, right? So these are, this is a really detailed diagram that shows internal structures and how they develop similarly. And these are some actual photos and like radiographic stuff. But here's your salamander at one point. Look at the weird belly-like thing on that guy. That's bizarre, right? But you can also see at the beginning how very similar. And this one here, for example, it shows you, so for example,
What is that?
they have, well, this one is a human, I believe, and they have gotten this embryo down to very specific structures. For example, this is going to be bladder eventually, this right here. Let's see, what's another obvious one? Oh, up here, I just saw trachea here. Yeah, here's your right atrium. This develops specifically to right atrium. You can see like this is going to be a cervical nerve, 10th nerve. So they can get embryo anatomy down to a very fine level. And I'm not sure exactly what stage this embryo is, but it's pretty early stage. So this shows the position of gill slits between and tails between different types of organisms as they develop embryologically. So genetics and molecular biology. So biochemists today have compared chemicals found in living things, for example, DNA and protein. The genetic code is nearly identical in almost all organisms. And this is powerful evidence that all organisms evolved from common ancestors that share this code. So for example, here's your DNA sequencing of this butterfly, this owl, and this owl, which is kind of hard to see. But here, a little more trimmed down for you. Here's your human, tomato, yeast, archaea, and bacteria. And you can see all of your similarities are blocked there in yellow. So this is where they're all the same. These are, it says conserved amino acids are boxed in yellow. So these are amino acids produced in each of these organisms. All the same, all the same, all the same. So we have a lot in common with the tomato and, you know. And you can see here, there's this particular amino acid in all but bacteria. And this one here is all but bacteria. Now you got yeast, tomatoes, and humans here, but different down here. So you can see how more closely related organisms are going to have more in common chemically. Okay, so here are your answers for your notes if you want to look at them. And I think I have, is it 2 pages of that? Yes, it's three pages of that. So I'll put them up for a minute each so you can look over and make sure you have your information. Question, was this exam, Unit 4 exam, harder than ones in the past?
I studied more for this one, so I can't tell you.
Okay, you found it harder? Yeah, it had a lower average than ones in the past. So I was curious as to.
I was reading from the right book this time. So.
That helps. Yeah. Yeah.
I spent all Friday morning working on it. So it was pretty easy.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Most of the time you're going to find whatever's on that test. Most of the time, either if it's not directly from your homework or your notes or a slideshow, it's the same concept. It may not be the exact same thing, but it's the same concept. So I've been working on your midterm and I'm about halfway done with your midterm. So I know what's going on it so far, and we'll do like we always do, and we'll study for it, you know, because we have a few more weeks still. But yeah, keep that in mind as you're, yeah, about a month. But we have Thanksgiving off and then we leave early for Christmas. So it's really not too many more. But when you're deciding what to keep in your binder and what to toss from your binder, you know, remember that you still have a midterm coming up and final, and the final will cover stuff from first semester and second semester like it always does. So There are certainly things you don't want to pitch. You may want to take it out if it gets heavy, but you don't want to toss it because you're going to need it. Also, this is your friendly reminder that as we move through Unit 5, it means we are wrapping up semester 2, and you have a final project in May. I mean, semester 1, and you have a final project in May, right? This is your reminder. You can start that anytime you want, right? You can get that done soon. You don't have to wait because everybody ends up panicking at the last week. And I intentionally set up my class so you don't have to do that. So let me show you where we're headed real quick, and then I will let this go. But yeah, since it's not quite a month, I think, Michael, I think it's 3. It might be 4 weeks, but I think it's 3 because of the way Christmas, well, lessons, I mean, because the way Christmas and Thanksgiving line up.
Are we gonna do a party?
Yeah. So we're here at lesson 14. This is us this week, right? Starting Unit 5. You're off next week. There is no class. Lesson 15, coming back. Then we have 16, okay? And then we have 17, and that is midterms and the party, okay? So we've only got, for this next lesson, we've got where am I? Sorry.
16, are we doing?
15, 16. Yes, we will do some Jeopardy at 16. It says, where does it say it in here somewhere? Midterm study packet. Oh yeah, review for midterms, team trivia competition. So yes, we'll do something like Jeopardy, if not Jeopardy exactly, but we will do something. Team trivia competitions.
What movie are we gonna do?
So I believe we're gonna do, if I don't change my mind, it's called The Living Sea. And some of you have seen it before, but it's always worth watching again. It's it was an IMAX film, and it's really, really interesting because it goes into all sorts of different like marine habitats, and it's really pretty because it's an IMAX, so it's just visually stunning. So again, you'll bring something to snack on. You'll do midterms first. If you've got Jackie's exam, you'll do Jackie's exam after that, or however she has it set up with you. And then we'll have our little party, watch our movie, and just kind of chill.
Can you
Right.
show the other 2 sheets?
Yep. Okay, yeah, so I'll put them back up so you can check your answers. And so there's 3. Here's 1, 2, and 3. So I'll put this one up for about 4 or 5 minutes. Yep, always. They're always there. You can always check it there. So it's 1:23. That gives you 7 minutes for those of you who've got Jackie. So you can stretch and get ready and take your lab, if I borrowed it, for a picture there. Thanks for sharing. And I hope you guys have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Is anybody traveling? We're traveling, so we're gonna go see our Virginia people. And some of them are really old.
Bye, Shauna.
Yep. All right, Shannon, we'll catch you later. Oh, I'll put this other one up real quick. There we go. Okay. Hi, Shannon.
We just open the chat.
Oh, did she chat? Alex, get that right. Just on the we're put together and it was supposed to be separate words. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.